a lot happened the last few days out in Indianapolis for former Huskers, as you had Ty Robinson, Thomas Fidone, Isaiah Neyor, and Tommi Hill all out there trying to impress teams ahead of the draft, which is next month. Yes, because we are into March. Now we can say the NFL draft is next month. Nebraska's Pro Day coming up later this month. You started out well, really well, with Ty Robinson and what he was able to do. He was moving. Thomas Fidone looked like he moved really well. He was super explosive. And then you did not see Tommi Hill perform because he still has that ankle that he's nursing, not 100% healthy. So we went through the interviews. We'll see if he comes back for Nebraska's Pro Day, March 25th. And then Isaiah Neyor, he, again, super athletic, what you saw there. Not all of that lines up with, especially those last two that performed with Fidone and Neyor. That doesn't necessarily line up with their production that you saw on the field at Nebraska. But when you're up there in the underwear Olympics, it's about how athletic you are and what kind of numbers you put up. So what did you take away from seeing some of these guys running around, making big jumps, and Fidone looked like he was catching the ball well in some of those drills?
I would actually start with Fidone. And not that I didn't expect him not to test well, but I know that Thomas Fidone is one of those guys that we were always left with wanting to see more because of the ceiling that Thomas Fidone has always had. And I think it's always important to remind folks the devastation that his knees went through in his time at Nebraska. But watching him move around, the hands were good. The acceleration, I know the comparison was made that he's built like the Terminator. That's not bad. I don't think that's a negative when people are labeling you as the Terminator. But he's one of those guys that I think are a handful of guys in the draft that if you look at the career numbers at their respective programs, don't maybe necessarily line up to what you see from the individual and the individual workouts. I think there is so much potential there with Thomas Fidone. I think there's a lot of draftable potential there with Thomas Fidone based on what you saw, just the glimpse that you saw at the workout, because the speed looks like it's definitely there. It doesn't look like there is any holding back whatsoever. And you're right. I mean, he was catching the ball. He was doing everything so smoothly. And he graded out in a lot of the categories in the top 4 tight ends. I think he had the 4th best 40 time amongst all tight ends that tested out, which is great. The other big takeaway I had, when you are 6'5", 288 pounds, and you are running a sub 540, these are the nightmares that I would have if I was a running back or a quarterback or a wide receiver or anybody on the offensive side. Ty Robinson running that 40, and I know a lot of us watched that on Thursday. God, when he started getting some steam, it almost looked like he shouldn't be able to run that fast. Like they were doing something, little CGI technology. Yes. So yeah, he was like one on the airport skywalk things or whatever. It was just, it was mind blowing. And I've talked about this with Ty. I think we're just scratching the surface with him, because there was a moment before Matt Rule and the staff got there that I think there was that belief that Ty Robinson was almost getting burnt out, because remember, Casey Rogers leaves. They didn't have a lot of depth on that defensive line. And then in comes that first wave of freshmen alongside of the emergence of Nash. You have 2 now solid defensive interior linemen. And then you get even though Princewell's no longer here, but you get the edge guys like Princewell, Cam Lenhart, Riley Van Poppel. You start getting some of those transfers, MJ and all those guys being able to contribute. And all of a sudden you're unlocking Ty Robinson. I think he's not that he hadn't been a good player before, but all of a sudden you had guys around you that were allowing him to get some one-on-one battles and really show the type of dominance that he can show. And his game continued to evolve. So I think we're just scratching the surface on Ty Robinson. I think that might be the prevailing thought after the combine of this guy only got better from year 1 to year 2 as a full-time starter in the Tony White defense. So I think there's a lot of buzz on him. Isaiah Neyor, I'm not surprised either, because the length of him. Now, what was the other issue with him? Could he catch the ball?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. He did. He did fine. He's got the speed. And that there is that NFL type length that you want to see at the wide receiving position. So the way that those guys tested, I'm not surprised. The guys that I think benefit the most off of how they tested, and we'll see, as you mentioned, with Pro Day as well, I think are Ty. And honestly, Tommi Hill did not work out. If anybody's wondering why we're not talking about Tommi Hill, he did not work out at the combine, right. Just did the interviews and everything, and he'll work out at the Pro Day. So that's going to be interesting to see how he does. But I think based on what Thomas Fidone was able to do, more than anything, showing the scouts that the injuries are behind him, I think are very big for his possibility of hearing his name called. And then Ty Robinson, I think for a guy that's projected to be a day 2 or day 3 guy, maybe he's squarely on the day 2 level right now, which it would be tremendous. Because I think wherever he lands, he's going to impact the team, I think, sooner rather than later.
I think just on testing alone, you saw all 3 guys that went out and did the on-field drills helped themselves.
Yeah.
When you went through all of that. Robinson seemed like he helped himself the most with where he potentially was able to go. Mm-hmm. Like we said, Fidone and Neyor both had the overall production, just wasn't maybe what you would think lines up with where they are athletically. How's this? So the relative athletic score that one of these guys gives out, I'm going to click on it just so I can make sure I give it correctly. You can go to ras.football, and it goes through and it combines all of their scores from the testing. Mm-hmm. And it also spits out comparative scores. This is the part that I found very intriguing. So with Ty Robinson, mm-hmm. his RAS comparisons include, and I'm going to butcher some of these names because I didn't really cover them, but Taven Bryan from Florida in 2018. Mm-hmm. That was a first-round draft pick.
Yep.
Rook Orhorora from Clemson in 2024. He was a second-round draft pick. And Keon White from Georgia Tech in 2023. He was a second-round draft pick. Yep. Those are all the immediate comparisons when you add in all of that testing for what they did. And that's not just how fast they ran, how high they jumped. That includes body size. That includes all of your measurables with that as well. For Thomas Fidone, which, by the way, his broad jump was number 1 out of all of the tight ends there. That was stupid insane.
I think he reminded us how much of a freak athlete he is at the combines. And that's why the combines and the workouts are good for people like that maybe didn't have the career numbers, but you're like, Jesus, there's something there. And there is with Thomas Fidone. We know that.
Yeah. And for Fidone, Stephen Sullivan from LSU 2020, Greg Dulcich from UCLA 2022, Tanner McLaughlin from Arizona 2024, 7th, 3rd, and 6th rounds, respectively. Here is the one that this was most eye-popping for me. And you haven't read my story at Husker Max, right? So this isn't going to be – okay, no. Good.
You're surprising me.
Good. The relative athletic score comparisons for Isaiah Neyor. One of them was Isaiah Weston from Northern Iowa in 2022. He went undrafted. Mm-hmm. The other 2 – Calvin Johnson and Julio Jones.
Hey, they're not bad.
Top 10 picks. And the reason being is because of how big Isaiah Neyor is.
Yes.
So that's the part where the measurables came in. And know what you were able to see Calvin Johnson do at Georgia Tech, Julio Jones do at Alabama. No, Isaiah Neyor did not do that in Lincoln. You know? Right. That's the production side of it.
We didn't have mini Megatron in Lincoln, we know.
Yeah. When you're looking at strictly the measurables and the athleticism and the explosiveness, Neyor has put himself in a position to be one of those end-of-roster guys, at the very least practice squad, because if he can get it going, the ceiling is very high for him.
Yeah.
Because of what he is athletically and what his size is. I know we didn't see it in Lincoln, and this was one of you saw the conversations, is what I'll call them, on social media over the weekend. We all know where Thomas Fidone was, but with Isaiah Neyor, it was, well, why didn't you scheme him open more? Why didn't you try to get him the ball more? Well, he dropped the ball a number of times.
He did.
And I think that's a skill that can be improved.
Yeah.
What's a harder thing to improve? How big you are, how tall you are, how long your arms are. and to take those and be explosive and fast and agile. And those are the things that Isaiah Neyor showed this weekend that I think are going to help him on day 3 with finding a home.
Yeah, I think the NFL draft is a little unique compared to Major League Baseball and the NBA from the simple standpoint of those two that I mentioned between MLB and NBA are a little bit more based on potential, almost weighing potential in more than proven track record. I think for the NFL, there is more on proven track record, but potential definitely has its place in it. And so the part about Isaiah Neyor is, you're right. I mean, the length, the hand size, all of those things, either you have that or you don't. Now, if you have that, that's going to get you a few more eyeballs, despite what your track record at the previous places you were at would tell you. If you're on the other side of that, where not the biggest guy, hands are mid-size, speed is mid, but dang, you were productive. And man, winning a lot of 50-50 balls, a lot of those little things, those intangibles that you can go back to the productions, the stats in the film and say, well, what he lacks for overall size physically, we know the ability is there. So I think for Isaiah Neyor, and here's the other thing, if we're going to be fair about Thomas Fidone and the injuries that I think he showed the scouts that he's over, you got to do that with Isaiah Neyor too, because this was a guy that was also, had an ACL as well. So, I think there's a little bit of that. Guys that have that injury history, whether it was a lot more unfortunate for Thomas Fidone than it was for Isaiah Neyor as far as the amount of them that they have, that's the first thing you're watching if you're a scout is, how are they moving? Does it look like there are any setbacks? Does it look like, if I were to look at this guy not knowing his injury history, would I be able to point something out? I'd be like, oh, I bet he had an ACL, or I bet he had an MCL, or he had an ankle or something. And if the answer is no, I wouldn't know that. That's great for both of them. So if anything I take away from Thomas Fidone, but especially Isaiah Neyor as well, is that they're showing scouts that they're past that, and that maybe in those interviews you can talk about, my lack of production a little bit had to do with the physical part. Still was working back, maybe didn't mentally feel right off that leg, or off, in Thomas Fidone's case, both legs. Mm-hmm. And so I think there are organizations that can listen to that could factor that in, and then can watch the workouts and say, damn, this is hard to pass up. Even if this is a 6th or 7th round type of thing that we're looking to do, we see this is where that potential thing kicks in. We see the potential there, and we think this could be big for us.
All right, those 4 guys that were in Indianapolis, I'm going to give you a snap question here. We'll throw in Nash, too, who was not invited to the Combine. Those 5 guys, day 1, 2, or 3, just initially, where do you see each one lining up?
I'm going to say Ty is day 2. I think he worked himself into that conversation where he's day 2. I think your next guy is I still think Fidone gets it. I think he's day 3. Tommi Hill, I'll be curious to see how he works out, because remember, at one point he was considered to be a potential
late first
round. Exactly. But I still think he's a day 3. I think corners and the way he's built, that's still something that's always hard to come by, but I think he will get drafted. I have a tough time believing Nash won't, but I think Nash will definitely be on the back end. Isaiah Neyor, I could go either way with it. Right now I'll say UDFA, but I think Ty will lead the charge. I think he's a day 2 guy.
Yeah, Neyor is kind of that one sitting on that line. Nash a little bit too, but because of the measurables, I think Neyor, you might find a coaching staff that says, let's get him in the 7th. Yeah. Let's get him at the end here, so we don't have to go through any negotiating. He's just ours. Yep. And you bring him in because of the size, and you see what you can work with. And who knows if that moves, say, like Thomas Fidone up around or something as well. And man, Robinson helped himself. Ty Robinson helped himself quite a bit.